Welcome to the Camp Ellis neighborhood meeting. I'm really happy to see that we've got a lot of public interest out here tonight. My name is Shannon Chisholm. I'm the Assistant City Planner for the City of Saco, and I am going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves and let you guys know which organizations they're with.
My name is Diana Huot, and I'm the newly elected chair of the Saco Historic Preservation District.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for coming. My name is Andrew Bracey. I am the vice chair of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Good evening, folks. I'm Joe Gunn. I'm the Ward 3 City Councilor, and in that capacity, I am the council liaison to the Historic Preservation Commission.
I'm David Plavin. I'm the Vice President of SOS Saco Bay.
All right, and just a quick overview of the agenda for tonight. So I'm going to be giving a presentation of the Camp Ellis Architectural Survey and Resiliency Options Report. And so, of course, that includes resiliency options. The architectural survey talks about historical preservation, and then after I'm done giving that presentation, we will be opening up the meeting as a public hearing to inquire some feedback of what the thoughts and feelings are down in Camp Ellis about possibly establishing a historic district down there. And then before you leave, Joe will be handing out a anonymous survey that we would really appreciate you filling out. I have left a whole bunch of pens at the back table to make it easy to fill out, and once you're done filling it out, if you could just place it in the box, that would be very helpful for us. So the Camp Ellis Architectural Survey and Climate Resiliency Study is a report that it was 2 years in the making. About 2 years ago, the city got a grant to do this research, and we, over the summer, hired Kleinfelders as our consultant to put together this report for us. As you can see, the graph displayed on this slide shows different scenarios for sea level rise in Maine. The one that most scientists believe is most likely is represented by the red dotted line, which shows that in 2050, Maine will have experienced about 1.5 feet of sea level rise. And then that would be projected to rise somewhere between 3 feet and 5 feet by 2100. So I'm going to try to give a synopsis of the report. A lot of it is very complicated, but it mostly centers around two different scenarios. One being the protect scenario, and the other one being the recover scenario. Both of these scenarios factor in the 1.5 feet of sea level rise that is projected for 2050. But the protect scenario is based off of that level of sea level rise plus a 10% extreme water level event. So a 10% extreme water level event could be things such as a king's tide or a nor'easter. And while there's only a 10% chance of an event like this happening within any given year, over a 30-year period, there's a 95.8% chance of that happening. So I'm talking in 30 years' times, mostly because that's the average length of a mortgage. And so it's important for people who own property down there to know that. So a protect scenario would result in almost 10 feet of sea level above the zero elevation. The zero elevation in the report is NAVDA 88, and I have a slide about NAVDA 88 because that might be a little confusing, but basically it's a significant amount above zero elevation. The recover scenario is the sea level rise combined with what's considered a 1% extreme water level event. So this is like a hurricane. And while these events are only 1% likely to happen in any given year, over a 30-year period, there's a 26% chance that this could happen in Camp Ellis. And the resulting sea levels from an event like this would be almost 11.5 feet over zero elevation. So this graph right here shows what the NAVDA 88 looks like. So again, the NAVDA 88 is the zero elevation that's being used in the report. And as you can see, sometimes sea levels are above zero elevation because of tidal changes or below zero elevation because of tidal changes. But generally, the zero elevation is very close to what's considered to be the mean sea level. So where the sea level is on average. So there are many graphs in the report, but I figured that this one was probably the most important one. And so this graph shows where flooding would likely occur in Camp Ellis based on the 1.5 foot sea level rise and the two different scenarios of either the protect or recovery scenario. The darker blue is where you would see flooding during the protect scenario, so that's the 10% extreme water level events. And the lighter blue, which might be hard to see, is how far the flooding would reach into Camp Ellis under a 1% extreme water level event. The different shadings of the buildings correspond to how much flooding each building could expect under a 1% extreme water level event. So as you can see, the lighter the building color is, the more flooding would occur during an event like that. The building that is bright yellow would be projected to be under 10 to 16 feet of water in a scenario like this. So I thought it was really important to talk about the resiliency options that are available for everyone down in Camp Ellis. And the way the report does the resiliency options, they focus around building types. And the three most common building types down in Camp Ellis are wood-framed buildings elevated on piers, wood-framed buildings on concrete slab foundations, and wood-frame buildings on concrete block foundations with basements. And the resiliency options are all different depending on which building typology you have. So some of those resiliency options include minimizing exposed assets. So that's making sure that anything that's vulnerable to floods, from belongings to utilities, are protected and raised above your flood level risk. So an example of this would be if you have a basement and your hot water heater is in your basement and your basement is projected to flood, moving that possibly to the first floor and maybe an underutilized closet would help enhance the resiliency of your home during flood events. There's also an option called wet proofing, and so wet proofing is different. It basically allows flood waters to enter your home and then drain. And it is mostly recommended for homes where the flood risk is below the first floor or the main living area. So if you have a crawl space, it's making sure that there aren't a lot of belongings in your crawl space, so if it does flood, you don't lose as much. Or making sure your basement doesn't have a lot of valuable things that if it were to flood, you would risk having be destroyed. There are some other types of wet flood proofing that are available for when your flood risk is at or above your main living area, but for that, I would definitely recommend you look at the report because it lists all sorts of different options for houses like that. Then, of course, there's the option that most of us are going to be familiar with, dry flood proofing. So this is preventing the water from entering the house. And that could include having temporary structures that block the water or seal the exterior of the building. It could include waterproof coatings and different types of barriers that block the windows and the doors. And then the 4 other resiliency options include filling the basement if you have a basement and it's prone to flooding, elevating the building on a new foundation. As everybody is aware, there are many homes already down in Camp Ellis who have chosen this option, and it can be very helpful. But of course, elevating the building on a new foundation is best done in Camp Ellis on poles to allow for the fast-moving floodwaters to cause less damage to the building. In extreme scenarios, moving the building to another location is an option. And then lastly, flood insurance is a useful tool, even if you are currently not within a flood zone, and your flood risk will determine how expensive that may be for your own property. So I just wanted to bring attention to these nice little charts. Some of you who have looked at the report may have already seen them, but I think they lay out the different resiliency options really well. They do it by building typography and then what your flood risk is based on that chart that I showed previously. So in this example, this is a wooden frame building on a slab foundation, and even during the 1% extreme water level event, the flooding falls below their first level in this scenario. So as you can see in the chart, it's still recommended that utilities be elevated and waterproof utilities, that happens, and flood insurance be bought, but all of the more extreme resiliency options are not being suggested for a house that falls into this scenario. So that brings us to the architectural survey portion of this report. So as many of you already know, some of these surveys findings will not be surprising, but most of the buildings in Camp Ellis were built in the late 1800s to early 1900s. New construction tends to be larger, and of course, original buildings have been expanded over time. Several original structures have been demolished and replaced with newer, larger construction. And some of the Kleinfelder recommendations, which is part of why we are here tonight, have suggested either a limited historic district around the 6 properties that were considered to be National Registry eligible, or an expanded district over the survey area to preserve the character of the resort neighborhood and to prevent the loss of historic properties. So a lot of questions on the lead up to this meeting that I was asked is, how does historic preservation and climate resiliency work together? Because obviously the intention is not to make it harder for people to preserve their homes. And one of the documents listed on the extra sheet of resources is this one. It's called the Secretary of the Interior's Standards for Rehabilitation and Guidelines on Flood Adaptation for Historic Homes. And the resiliency options in the Camp Ellis report and the resiliency options in this document line up pretty well. Everything that is bolded and in a reddish pink color, those are all the same that were in the report and in the brief that the Department of Interior has issued. So the important thing, I wanted to give an, one of the things that I wanted to give an example of is how is climate resiliency done in a historic preservation district. And I wanted to give an example from the Department of Interior brief. So when it comes to protecting utilities, I'm just going to read one of them. But I'll make this PowerPoint available on the Historic Preservation website in case anyone wants to take a look at it after the meeting. But one of the recommendations is relocating the utilities above the established flood risk or placing them in watertight or impermeable enclosure. What they're not recommending is that when you move those utilities, not to move them to something that is historically significant, such as the dining room of your 1880s home, or they mostly just want it to move into a space such as a closet that would have no real impact on the historical value of the home. So some of the benefits that can come out of a historical district include maintaining property values, beautification of the neighborhood, and then of course maintaining neighborhood character. And then we have 3 options that we want to hear from you about your opinions, what your thoughts are. I'd like to reiterate, no decisions are being made tonight. This really is just a fact-finding meeting. And at the end of the day, if the people of Camp Ellis are not interested in a historical district, that is a fine option. But the 3 options that we would really like to hear your opinions on include whether you're interested in creating a limited district over the 6 properties that are considered National Registry worthy, or interested in creating a larger historic district that covers Camp Ellis. And then lastly, of course, thank you for the report. Thank you for the resiliency options. No, I do not want a historic district in my neighborhood. All 3 of those are valid options. So before we open the public hearing, I just wanted to lay some ground rules and whatnot. But if you can, please come up to the podium and state your name and address. If you're from the study area, we'd really like to know. If you're not from Saco, you can please state your name and your town and your state, please. For first times up, we're hoping to keep comments to about 3 minutes. But after you've spoken once and everyone else who wants to speak has spoken, we do encourage you to come up again if you have more to say. And then how are we going to be handling questions? So some of the questions we're not going to be able to have answers to right away. Some of it's going to require us to do some research. So questions will be written down as they're asked during the public meeting, and we may ask you to repeat your question in case we didn't get it quite right. But after the public meeting is closed, the panel will answer some of the questions we've written down if we know the answers off the top of our heads, such as, could you please explain more about extreme water level events? Those kinds of questions. And then any questions that require research, the panel will respond to at a later date and most likely post those answers to the Historic Preservation website. So, with that being said, I'm going to sit down and stop talking for a little bit, and I invite anyone who's interested in speaking to please come forward.
Can I just do questions?
Hi, my name's Charles Pendleton. I live on 2 Riverside Ave in Camp Ellis. I just have a couple questions, judging, going over the PowerPoint there. The flood picture that you showed that showed all the different levels of flooding, is that based on the year 2050? Yes. Okay, thank you. Also, as far as the, this is kind of goes, I think, hand in hand, is the working on the breakwater to try to recover some of the beach. I know there's been a lot talked about, and I believe resolutions have come up, but nothing's happened with it. Now, having said that, if some sort of resolution is workable and it does happen, does that change any of the data that was presented to us in regards to this 2050 flood diagram that I looked at?
We will definitely answer that question as soon as we close the public hearing. But that is a great question. Thank you.
And my last one is in regards to this historic district. It's kind of couple-fold. First, why? What's the purpose? First is, why do we want to do it? Or why is the city looking into doing it? The second question is, what is the purpose of doing it? And what are the benefits of doing it? That's it.
I saw that you wrote them down. Could I keep them?
If you can read it. So.
Good evening, all. My name is Paul Trahan. I live on 36 Main Avenue in Camp Ellis in Saco. My question seems to be, first question is either identical or quite similar to Mr. Pendleton's, and that was, does what was presented tonight at all include the planned Army Corps of Engineers beach restoration and jetty enhancement? It seems to me that should be a yes or no question. That doesn't require any study. Everything that you presented doesn't seem to indicate that it does.
Not.
It does not.
It does not.
Okay, thank you. My wife and I have had discussions over the years with the original SOS and way back about actually trying to preserve the area. And of course, it's like Hatfields and McCoys down there. That should not be a surprise to anyone regarding beach versus rocks and that kind of thing. And I don't really want to get into that. But since the letter that I received indicates that my home on Main Avenue is one of those that could be registered, what limitations does that put on my home for anything that I wish to do to it? I have no clue as to that. So that's kind of important to me. The other thing is I think I can guess at least 5 of the homes that are on that register, or that are suggested, that are indicated in this letter of the 6. Do you mind just giving us the other addresses on Main Avenue, which homes are included?
I can't give them to you off the top of my head, but they are included in the chart towards the end of the report. I'll try to find it for you.
Yeah, just the numbers. I'm sure that it's the house in front of me that I still refer to as the Har House. My home, the Centavides place, I would imagine. Across the street, the small cottage, that's there, so that's 4. I'm looking for the other 2. So, thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Cindy Sayers, and I live at 39 Lower Beach Road, or own the house. And I was confused, just like the 2 gentlemen who've preceded me, so please forgive me if my questions are the same. But my confusion is simply, is being part of the historic preservation area, or how will being part of the historic preservation area help in any way, shape, or form with the jetty issue? I just don't understand the correlation, if there is one. And if it doesn't correlate, then I'm confused, because if the jetty is what's setting up all of the destruction of the homes in this area, I'm still confused about why we would be worried about historic homes. If I deem try to get in my home as a historic home, how will that help me? Is it something that later on I get chits from the federal government or from the city of Saco or something like that? I've lived in other towns where if you're part of a historic preservation area, what essentially happens is you've got more strictures and controls placed on you rather than less. So if my house or part of my house gets somehow destroyed or taken away, I've got an issue with how am I going to rebuild that in the first place, and all of the environmental strictures that are on me right now, in addition to the city of Saco's building code and whatever else. So why would I look to add more of that to my burden if indeed the burden is, oh my gosh, a hurricane has just washed away half of my house? So I come with those kind of questions, not certainly saying I'm for or against, but certainly wondering about how this would affect us, especially if we're in a situation where me, my neighbors, et cetera, are very, very upset because we've just been hit like, the people in Florida or wherever else. It's just a very difficult thing to go through, and so that's why I'm asking that question. And I think that's it in terms of my general fears and concerns. And I'm sorry if the questions seem naive, but that's what we came here, I guess, tonight to hear about. So thank you for listening.
I'd like to assure everyone there's no bad questions in this situation, because we are here. This is a fact-finding mission. So anything you want to ask, feel free, though. And please, we are here to field them all, and that's how we all learn.
Hi, Mike Berman, 6 Margaret Circle, also the Ward 4 City Councilor, which covers Camp Ellis. I wonder if it wouldn't be worthwhile to actually differentiate the 3 different concerns. The damage being caused by the jetty and the erosion that causes the Camp Ellis beach, which may be mitigated by work with the Army Corps of Engineers and or wave attenuation devices by living shorelines. The second challenge of sea level rise caused by global warming and climate change, which would likely not be mitigated by the Army Corps of Engineers jetty spur or the wave attenuation devices. And third, of course, just the passage of time, which has caused some changes in the historic nature of the district that a historic preservation district might help, and to kind of distinguish between those 3 things that these different solutions might deal with. And I also maybe to humbly ask if you might do 2 rounds of public hearings, one where you answer some of the questions you've heard, and that may actually spur a second round of questions from folks, and then allow some additional questions to be asked once they've heard those answers, because I'm hearing a lot of questions that are kind of the same that might be informed by some of the answers that I know David and you and others may already have. Thank you.
To be clear as well, we will most likely have another meeting, especially since there are a lot of people who live in Camp Ellis who are away for the season, and we want to hear from them as well. So most likely we'll be holding that sometime in the early summer, I would think. Late spring, early summer.
Hi, Sue Cresswell. I'm at 6 Riverside Ave. So I'm glad that you addressed that because I know that a lot of our neighbors would be very interested in this. And some of them are in historical buildings. And if you lived in one of these houses in Camp Ellis, you might realize that there are not closets to be able to put water heaters and whatnot. So I think that this really impacts all this information, all the homeowners and the property owners here. So my biggest question right now is who and how is a historical district decided in the city? And how much say do the residents of that area have in that decision? I think that that's really imperative.
I'm at least going to answer your second question. The HBC will not be pursuing a historic district if the Camp Ellis residents don't want it.
Okay, great. Okay, that's good to know. And my biggest concern were the people that are not able to be here tonight. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Deb Grahn. I have a property at 8 West Ave. And my thinking, and I read the report, and my thinking is almost like the ship has sailed, right? For the historic district of Camp Ellis, it's a very eclectic mix of construction and old and new and duplexes and multifamilies that I almost think that it's kind of lost its opportunity for that. However, if there are 6 homes that are in that historic area, that I almost think that should be the focus, and maybe reaching out to those people to see if they want to be a part of it. There's a lot of restrictions down there for building code and stuff you want to do to your home down there. You have to deal with the Saco River corridor, you have to deal with the town, you have to deal with the DEP, and now to have another governing body tell us what we can do to improve our property and make our property safe and how we want to do things, I just think we don't need another body. So my option would say no, and if that area wants to be, those homes, those few select 6 homes that do want to be in that area, then leave out the other 128 that were part of the study. So that's my opinion.
My name's Elaine Sentimentus, 32 Main Ave. Just wondering the benefits of a historical society and why now? And we've owned the property since 1972. And the benefits regarding the beach upkeep and the streets and the Jersey barriers that are preventing the beach from eroding, which it does every year, so. And if one house does not want to be in the historical society, do you have to get the majority of the votes for all the 6 houses, or is it just individual?
That one I will get back to you on.
Which one?
Sorry. Let me come up to the mic.
Yeah.
Sounds like a simple question, do you have to get the majority?
Yeah.
But I feel like that'll require some more thought and whatnot. So that one I'll get back to you on.
Okay. And what about the upkeep on the streets and the beach and the?
That one we'll address after the public hearing is closed.
Yeah, and we do have a question that we had heard earlier coming in through the Facebook feed from Susan Hurd, the owner at 2 Beach Ave, looking to see what the 6 identified historic registered designated homes would be. So, Susan, we have your question. We will be following up on that.
Hi, my name's Ken McPhillips. I live on 25 North Ave in Camp Ellis. And looking at your map there that you showed, you said that the building or the buildings in yellow would be underwater. That would be most of Camp Ellis. That was the pier. Was that correct? Is that the pier that was going to be underwater? That's everything down in Camp Ellis, would it not be, Dave?
The average elevation down there is around 10 feet, so slight elevation now and at time, he was going to 13. So if you're talking up and a half, you're talking 10 and a half, a good portion will be.
So with that being said, is everybody for those 6 homes that you are concerned with the registry, you should be asking them whether they want to be on the registry, because I don't think there's a benefit to being on it, right? The other thing is if everything goes underwater by 2050 and all the homes get lifted, then are we not going to have to use boats to go out to see these historical homes? Because that would be just kind of futile, I think, right? I mean, but anyway, I don't think my house is one of the historical ones. Knock on wood. I wouldn't want to be governed because, again, there are a lot of restrictions. When it comes to FEMA, Dave was saying it's a FEMA thing, that if you put in more than 50% of the value of your house, not the land, the house, you have to lift it. And most of those houses, I can speak for mine, I think, when I looked, when he told me this, because I was a little concerned, because I did do some fixing up down there, my house was only valued at $56,000. That's like short money down there that I'm borderline of, if I put too much more money in it, I'm going to have to lift it. Then I got to come up with the money to lift it. Or is the Historical Society, if they decide to do the community, going to lift all these houses for the people? At that point, then maybe I would say, yeah, maybe I do want to be in the Historical Society because I might not be able to afford to lift it once I go into retirement. Right? So, anyway.
Hi, my name's Bruce Zivick. I live on 6 Main Street, and clearly we have a couple houses that are eligible for historic designation, but the community in itself, I don't know. I'm not so sure that the district itself will qualify historically, but if it doesn't, has there been some thinking about architectural control that would stop some runaway things from happening, such as, massing in the houses, where we're starting to get older houses that are, modest in size and appropriately scaled for the time, but now we're getting the new houses in that are, maximizing the zoning, going, wall to wall, maximizing the height, and it's really sort of destroying the neighborhood. And I come from the DC area, and within the last 3 years, in Arlington, I think is a good example, North Arlington in particular, where the property values have increased to a point where people are coming in and they're just raising all the houses and putting in McMansions, if you will, and they're really destroying neighborhoods. Arlington's coming to grips with this, so there's a way that this has been addressed and looked at. So we wouldn't be plowing any new ground, but I do think that it's something that needs to be looked at because I think the character of Camp Ellis could be destroyed. I mean, the worst possible thought is it turns into Miami Beach, which obviously it won't, but, we got, 4- and 6-story structures next to 1- and 2-story bungalows, so that's really my question, I guess. So to repeat that is that if we don't go with historic district, can we incorporate some architectural guidelines? And I've got a second question, but I'll wait until everybody's done.
We have another question coming in from Nancy Bartolo at 24 Cove Avenue, wondering if those on the Facebook live stream will be able to hear these questions being answered after the public hearing. Shannon, if you want to address it.
Yes, so the questions that we are going to be able to answer tonight, you'll be able to hear. We will be continuing to live stream after the public hearing closes so that we can, as a panel, answer some of the questions that were asked tonight. And then for the questions that we don't have the answers readily available for, we will be addressing them later and making sure that they are available to the public. I hope that answers your question.
Paul Trahan again. Is there any tax benefit to the area? All of us down there, regardless of the size of our properties, are on average paying 2.5 times what the rest of Saco pays for comparable property. If I get a plaque on my house that says it's historic, I wouldn't object to that just in and of itself, but what's the advantage to me, or what are the disadvantages to me? Is the city planning on helping us in a way that they haven't helped us for the 33 years that I've lived there, and 50 years and longer from some of my neighbors whose families go back generation and generation? Is there going to be anything that benefits us? Again, my wife and I, in general, without knowing any of the answers to these questions that have been asked but not answered tonight, so far anyway, we'd be kind of thinking that it would be a great thing to have a plaque on our house, but I want to know what the restrictions then become. So are any of those questions going to be answered tonight, or is this something, once this part is over, that you folks will be able to answer?
The tax benefit portion of it is something that's going to have to be researched. I know that that is available in other communities.
You mean my taxes will go down?
In other communities, that is something that
Has happened?
that has happened. But that does not necessarily mean that will happen in Saco. It's just something that I'd have to research.
Again, having been involved in the economics in past years, unless things have changed, that little 5 acres in Camp Ellis, we pay 30% of all the tax revenue for the entire city of Saco. For the first 7 years that I lived there, they didn't plow the roads. And it was only when one gentleman who was a French war hero happened to die in a snowstorm that they started actually plowing us. So anyway, so whatever it is that you can answer tonight would be appreciated. Thank you.
I can answer the question on monetary benefits. The one community whose ordinance contained a monetary benefit, the way that they worked it was that any improvements that were made, the city, town would pay a portion of those.
Okay.
There was no direct tax reduction, but it was recognition of improvements and maintenance and some reimbursement for that.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's helpful.
Question, or another couple questions. When it comes to historical, does it not mean that someone famous lived in that house? It does not. Okay. Well, then I would have to say that then half of Saco needs to be historical, and I don't think it is yet. Is that true? Because a lot of buildings in Saco are from the turn of the century, if not before, right? So again, we should ask the 6 people if they want it, and then take it from there and look at the rest of Saco, because I think you have much more buildings out there that could be historical. And as time goes on, everything would be historical. So it's, I don't know, counterintuitive.
Here's one maybe you can answer tonight. And it's just a point of information for me. I didn't get to read the historic district rules, regulations, whatever, although I did try to get through the other report, and that took long enough that I'm now here and didn't get to read yours. So could you briefly tell us perhaps how the 6 houses were picked? Is there something that says here in Saco, for example, for your historic commission, a structure has to be a certain amount of years, 100 years, 50 years, 200 years, whatever? What is your basic sort of way of delineating, and certainly in Camp Ellis, what's the way that you decided to pick the houses? Because as a lot of my neighbors say, if we're all going to be underwater at some point, gosh, putting them on piers, whatever, is scary enough, but putting them on piers and then having them wash away, even if they're historic, is really scary.
So that question I can answer, and I want to be really clear that the Historical Preservation Commission didn't specifically pick these 6 houses. Kleinfelder, the consultant that we paid to do this report, they have what's called let me think of her title, and she's like an architectural historian. And so basically her job at the beginning of this project was to go around Camp Ellis and observe the different properties. And through her knowledge of architecture, she was able to pinpoint these 6 locations because their integrity from whence they were first built till now has remained generally unchanged. So they look very similar to how they would have originally been constructed in the early 1900s. I hope that is helpful. And that's why these 6 properties are some of the only properties that would be considered National Registry worthy, because obviously there have been changes to a lot of the properties down in Camp Ellis. Vinyl siding has been put up, things have been expanded, maybe the porches that are a significant architectural part of many of the structures down there, maybe they've been removed. And all of those things would make a home not eligible for National Registry anymore. So I hope that is helpful.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Shannon, but I don't think we could designate those 6 houses as a district unto itself. Each of those owners would have to seek designation as a National Historic Place.
So just a little bit of a difference. We could, Dave, we could have them be a district, but if they want to be nationally recognized, like on the National Register, there's a process for that they would have to individually seek out, which, while I do not know how to do that process, if one of those 6 properties was interested in it, I would be willing to help, obviously.
Hi, my name is David Toomey. I live at 32 North Avenue. I'm also Director of the Code Enforcement Department in the City of Saco. I don't have a question. I just wanted to make sure people had some facts so they could have a good decision. Most of the points I have, I would have been told about. Deb talked about another layer of government. We already have a DEP, Saco River Corridor, and now this would be them before they come to my office. Also, what Kenny said about the floodplain, right now it's 9 average down there, except for on the ocean, you're in a VE or an AO zone. But it's going to 13. They say next year, eventually it will get there. Right now, not all of Camp Ellis is in a flood zone, but when it goes to 13, it'll all be in a flood zone. And as Kenny said, if you put more than 50% of value into the home that requires a building permit, you shall pick it up. So it's going to get expensive. If a historic home has certain requirements to have certain products, they may be more expensive than the average home has to use, and it may make them pick up their house sooner. So it's just something they might want to be aware of before they make their decision. So that's why I figured I'd come forward. Thank you.
right. I just want to make sure that everyone has said what they would like to say tonight. And otherwise, I would be closing the public meeting, but, all right, come on forward.
Second question that I had to do with resiliency, and I'm not expecting an answer here. I really need some direction. When I lied to you earlier, I don't live on 6 Main Street, I live on 6 North Ave. So right at that corner there, at the beach, what happens is that when there's a large storm event, the city comes in to preserve access to the rest of the camp for emergency equipment by piling up the sand. What that does is it exasperates the flood waters to come over my property. So although happily I live in a lot that's been raised up on concrete piles or piers, the last storm about 5 years ago that was nasty, happily all went under, made it through without any issues. However, it went through 7 cycles, I think, of the tide. When that dam is put up, it redirects the water onto my property. Now, of course, it deposited 2 foot of sand, which I was responsible to get rid of. I mean, I live on coastal property. I expect a certain amount of that. That's a risk that I assumed, but I didn't expect that to be exasperated by the remediation process. I guess really what I want to know is, who do I talk to about floodwater that's been, what I would consider floodwater, that's been redirected onto my property? And in terms of helping, if not being responsible, but helping to help in the recovery of my property. And so I'm not sure who that is, if it's the Director of Public Works, if there's somebody in the state that is in charge of that floodwater mitigation. That's the answer that I'm looking for. So it's not exactly in your purview, but it bumps up against it. So if you could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
All right. If no one else wishes to speak, I will be closing the public hearing now. Going once, going twice. All right, so the public hearing is now closed. There will be another time to speak as we plan to have another meeting in which I'm hoping to be able to answer more of the questions that were listed tonight. The nice thing about this meeting tonight is it is being live streamed on Facebook, which means the recording of this meeting will be available to anyone who was not present tonight. So if you have anybody who wants to be able to access this, it will be on the City of Saco Facebook, the City of Saco YouTube, and eventually I will be able to post it to the Historic Preservation Commission website as well. So please send it to whoever you think might be interested and might want to know about what we talked about here tonight. But for now, I believe I'm gonna let the panel answer some questions. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, David, but there were many questions about the jetty, and I was hoping, so David was very nice enough to sit on the panel with us, even though he was not involved in the report, because I knew people would have questions about the jetty, and he, being part of SOS Saco Bay, knows a lot more about it than I do. So I appreciate him taking the time to be here tonight to field those questions for us.
So the report does not make any mention of potential remediation and what that might mean. The biggest problem is the erosion of sand. If we don't have enough sand, and that is what really kicks up high water levels. And also, it should be known that when you look at the graphs of potential sea level rise and over the next whatever, to 2050 to 2100 and beyond, the the two things, the two things that strike me about that is, one, where are they getting, it's, ocean topography is different everywhere. So, we could be higher, we could be lower. It's hard to say. And one thing that we don't have is, I don't think there's anything out in Saco Bay that's measuring sea level rise or that it's being recorded. So one thing that I've met a couple times with somebody that does this for her living, and I'm going to try and find out what we can do to see if we can get something out there. Now, the one thing that we do measure is obviously sand loss. The beach is mapped annually by Maine Geological, and we're losing a ton of sand. If we can get something to remediate the waves that are caused by the jetty, that would significantly slow that and enable us to replenish the beaches. More sand would definitely make a huge difference. I think the year after the Saco River was dredged and all that sand was on Camp Ellis Beach, that winter was one of the, in my time here, it was one of the least violent in terms of, splash over and street flooding and so forth. So I think, if we need to get more sand, we need to do something out there. We're getting closer to perhaps seeing something done. We're moving forward with the Army Corps, with hopefully getting some sort of agreement in place, maybe by the end of the year or early next year, to see what we can do out there. Now, the other thing is, we had Living Shoreline Solutions come in and do a study about using wave attenuation devices out there, and they would, they do factor in sea level rise. So if we get that solution, it would probably have a longer shelf life than just putting basically another seawall out in the middle of the ocean. So there's a lot to be determined. Regardless, it's not going to slow down global warming. It's not going to slow down sea level rise or water temperatures. And I think the one thing that has struck me when I've seen graphs that show sea level rise is it just keeps going up. There's no point in time where it's just going to stop or level off or go down. So, it's going to be very difficult to manage, what might happen 50 or 100 years from now. What other questions can I answer?
I think that hit some of the nails, because the questions that I heard repeatedly was, will a resolution to the jetty correct some of the flooding? And the answer sounds like some of it will be corrected, possibly not all of it.
A lot of it would depend, on the magnitude of the cause of that flooding. I mean, nothing's going to really stop a hurricane, but I think, the effect of a nor'easters could be somewhat mitigated. Again, if we have sand, if we have sand there, it makes a big, big difference. And, right now, any sand that gets out there is just washed away, and we can't hold sand, and then, we need to hold sand. Another thing that should be noted is that York County will have a dredge within the next year or two. And that would enable us to do some of our own dredging, put sand where we need to put sand, and move sand away from areas that shouldn't have as much sand as they do. So that would be that's something that also needs to be factored into this. So there's some hope. I mean, there's some hope that, within the next, I don't know, I'm going to say 2 to 3 years, that we could see some pretty dramatic improvement.
Thank you. So I also want to just piggyback off what David just said. Yes, we don't have anything off Camp Ellis that is measuring the tides. That's what you said, right?
Well, sea level rise.
Yeah.
I think, I think there's one in Portland Harbor somewhere, and that's the one that seems to be, that they're using, and I can't tell you, like, what the what they've recorded, but I think it's possible that we could get something out here. It's something that's sort of on my radar at this point. And I think that would be a really good thing to have.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to mention, is that in the study, they are using the Portland gauge because it's the longest running tidal gauge in Maine. I think it runs for like 14 something miles. And so they believed that that was the one that would have the most accurate information to do this kind of projections.
So just as a point of reference, if anybody wants to see sand movement and how Saco beaches in particular, and Camp Ellis Beach in particular, have been affected by the jetty, Maine Geological does do an annual beach report, and I don't know if it might be on the SOS website, but I can certainly get that, and you can see how dramatic the sand loss has been. And I can tell you that without, I don't think anybody would argue the fact that if we could maintain sand and had more of it, it would make a very big difference.
You answered as they went. Okay. So I'm just looking at my list of questions to see what I could possibly answer tonight, and I just asked if my my fellow Historic Preservation Commission members had anything, but they answered their questions as we went along. But some of the things that I wish I had written down on the page of resources that I gave out, that I will be making available later, is our Historic Preservation District ordinance. So it's already written in the Saco ordinance. It covers the downtown area, as many people may already be aware. We did reach out to the state before this presentation to ask if we could make a historic preservation district that was specific to Camp Ellis to allow for more wiggle room for climate resiliency purposes. And the answer that we got, unfortunately, was a resounding no, that if we were to have a historic district down in Camp Ellis, it must be the same as the one that is in the downtown area. So I wish I had included it in my resources list that I put out on all the chairs, but I will make sure that that's available in case you want to take a look at it. It also has the process by which a historical district is expanded within it, just to give people an idea of what that looks like. Off the top of my head, I know that it has to go to City Council, and I'm not going to speak for Joe, but actually, I'm not going to speak for Joe. Joe, would you like to chime in?
Well, thank you. The thing about it is, and I know the gentleman had asked this question. I think another resident had asked this question too. If the folks in the audience and the neighborhood as a whole only wanted to see maybe those 6 homes at most added to our historic preservation district, that is possible. Now, in that situation, however, before the council would act and actually create the district, the homeowners would actually have the right to say, I actually don't want to be on the district. So it's almost like a volunteer. It's like for that added layer of protection, if they feel it's a benefit to be part of the historic preservation and their home has been deemed to have some historic value, they can actually offer to be on it. Now, the reason I bring that up is about a year and a half ago, there was a push by Historic Preservation Commission. They were in contact with some homeowners throughout the community, and they had requested that some homes of historic value scattered throughout the city be added to the Historic Preservation Commission, almost like little dots of Historic Preservation Commission throughout the city. The council didn't feel that there was enough public feedback on that, and they didn't want a situation where people woke up one day and found themselves in a Historic Preservation Commission, and they could say, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this, what's all this about? So when it got to the council, it didn't even get a second on the council, though. The motion died because we were not in this council. I don't just want to speak for the council, though, but Councilor Berman was there, and I think we can attest that there was no appetite for this council to add another layer, if it's perceived that way, if the neighborhood doesn't want it. I mean, as I said, I am here not only as a liaison between this commission and the council, but in my capacity as a counselor, I can simply just say, in the past, we have not gone out of our way to add extra layers of red tape, for lack of a better term, if the neighborhood's not interested. And like I said, when we get back on some of these questions about benefits, whether it's, does it give the homeowner access to federal and state monies, though, to preserve their property, or just to preserve their town, or can it be a device where the town will pick up the tab if they are improving their home, whether it's beautification, whether it's keeping it as historic nature. These are things that we can research as a potential reason why you might want to be in a historic preservation district, but at the same time, if you didn't want that added level over your homes, though, you don't have to. Although I will say, when it comes to upkeep of your home, as witnessing the Historic Preservation Commission in action for the last 3 years as the liaison, this is not a draconian organization by any means, though. The Historic Preservation Commission is extremely reasonable, very reasonable when it comes to anything anyone wants to do with their property, though. And I would attest, though, that they're not looking for reasons to say no. They're looking for reasons to say yes. And so as a benefit to preserving what we have historically, this commission has served the city quite well in that regard.
So I'm going to piggyback off that as well. One of the resources that I listed on the other resources page that I put out is a brief from the Department of the Interior about composite materials. The Historic Preservation Commission currently is very amenable to composite materials on historic homes because we understand that it is difficult and burdensome to have to replace wood shingles after 5 to 10 years. And many of the projects that we have approved since I've been here, which granted has been a short time, but they have included composite siding, composite deck, composite just about anything you can think of. So again, even if you are not interested in a historic district, but you do have a historic home and you would like the historic home to keep its character, that brief might be helpful to give you ideas of what kind of composite materials are out there just for your home and for your personal use. All right. Bless you. I think at that point, most of these other questions we are going to have to. I plan on spending some time rewatching this video and actually taking down word from word some of the questions that were asked tonight. But as of right now, I think those are all of the questions that we can answer in their fullest. So before you leave, though, we do have a survey. And we would very much like you to fill out that survey. And we would also like to take a moment to thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for showing interest in the work that the Historic Preservation Commission has been doing around Camp Ellis. I'm very excited to have had as many people come out tonight and to share their thoughts and feelings about both Camp Ellis, its future, and historic preservation. So it's been wonderful to get to hear from all of you tonight. And I hope you feel that you can contact me at the planning department with any other questions you might have that might pop up once you leave here, my contact information is at the bottom of the other resources sheet. And if you do not have a pen to fill out our survey, I have scattered basically every pen in my office on the back table for your use. And again, just thank you very much for coming out tonight. And for the people listening on Facebook, I understand that you can't fill out the survey because you're not here, but I do plan on making it accessible to you at a further time. It may come to you in the form of a letter. It may just come to you in the form of a online PDF that you can email to me. But again, thank you for being here.